Hello, everyone, and welcome. We are so thrilled that you are choosing to invest part of your afternoon learning with us. My name is Becky Robinson, and I'm so thrilled to be with Libby Hoffman and Charles Gibbs again. You may have participated with us when we celebrated the virtual launch of Libby Hoffman's new book. The answers are there. I have the beauty in my hands right now. And if you've chosen again to come and learn with us, we're so honored and humbled and glad that you're with us. And I want to tell you, this is not going to be just your usual webinar. I'm already anticipating good learning in my own life as a result of having journeyed with Charles and Libby a bit in working together over the past few months. So as you're getting settled, we hope you'll take a moment. We hope you'll find the chat. It is in the bottom of your Zoom panel. And we would love to have you tell us where you're calling in from today. I would encourage you to use the drop-down menu to select everyone so that everyone can see your comments. And throughout today's event, we really do want to be engaging with you in the chat where you can put your questions, your comments, your observations. You can talk with each other. So welcome in Virginia City, Nevada, where they're snowed in. Looks like we have callers from the UK, from Alberta, Manitoba, Canada, British Columbia, lots of Canadian listeners today. We have a lot of major US cities: Boston, St. Louis, Dallas, Long Beach. So welcome to all of you. If you happen to be attending today, and this is part of your ongoing professional development, you're representing an organization, go ahead and tell us the name of your organization. We'd love to give a shout out to you for that as well. It looks like Diane is here from a credit union. I'm not sure the name of it, but welcome. So glad to have you. We're always thrilled that people invest in learning. It looks like we have people from Survivors Truths, from the University of Sussex, from Leadership Track, Creating Friendships for Peace, U.S. Institute for Peace, Learning to Lean. So lots of great professional development happening. So Libby and Charles, how are you today?
Great. Thrilled to be here. We're both together here in Washington, D.C.
Yeah.
Awesome. Yeah, it looks like we have someone from Rocket Consultants in DC. So before we go any further, I wanted to share with all of you a question that we've been thinking about as we prepped for this event. And before we got the webinar started, we were talking about curiously, how often leaders take the time on their journeys to pause to think about the kind of leaders they want to be. So I would love to know in the chat from you, how often do you pause to think about the kind of leader that you want to be? You know, today's topic is inside out leadership, and this is definitely a space where you can feel free to reflect on your own journey as a leader and the leader you want to be. And as I introduce Charles and Libby, I just want to say how much I've been inspired by watching each of them leading. Libby is the founder and the president of an organization called Catalyst for Peace. And Libby, across her career in leading Catalyst for Peace, has created this extraordinary approach to creating space for people who have been most impacted by violence and war. And she is working to build peace and restore social wholeness. One of the things that Libby has said that I love is, you know, that the structures that we all live in right now are broken. And those of us who want to see more wholeness in the world really need to be able to live into the new as it's still being created in the world. So it's been hugely inspiring for me to learn that from Libby. Libby is very well known for her work as a program partner of Fumble Talk, which is Family Talk in Sierra Leone. And if you haven't already had the chance to watch the Fumble Talk documentary, I would encourage you to put it on your must-watch list. It's hugely inspiring. So thanks for those who are reflecting about leadership in the chat. Paul mentions that he reflects after significant events. And of course, whenever we face a crisis, that is a time where we have to come face to face with the leaders that we want to be. It looks like there's at least one person who reflects every day. A few people are mentioning weekly, twice a week. So thank you for those of you who are taking the time to share. So really quickly, I also want to introduce Charles Gibbs. And Charles is an amazing guy who I've had the chance to get to know, and he's been serving as a senior advisor for Catalyst for Peace. He's also an Episcopal priest, a Sufi by adoption, which I need to learn a bit more about, a visionary, a peace builder, and a poet. And I was fortunate enough and blessed enough to have Charles's book of poetry arrive in my office. It is beautiful. Look at how beautiful it is. So welcome to you, Charles. And a couple of other notes. He's also a son, brother, husband, father-in-law, and grandfather. And we had the chance to talk as we were getting started about Thanksgiving and making all kinds of delicious food. So hopefully all of you enjoyed the holiday as well. So as we get started, we really want to frame up today's topic. And I want to ask the two of you, Libby and Charles, what does leading from the inside out mean to you?
Thanks, Becky. I'll jump in and start. For me, I think about it in two different ways. Being a peace builder and in the international peace building and development space, I think about it within that systemic professional context, which is, as you noted in the introduction, Becky, we operate from a fundamental belief that those closest to the problem should be the ones who get to lead in addressing the problems that they're facing. And that's rooted in the idea that the answers are there. The title of my book, that the very places most decimated by war or poverty or whatever kind of conflict actually have the resources within them. And so our approach has been to create the space where those inside, closest to the problem, get to lead. But that requires not just local leadership, but those that are outside supporting, engaging and support in a different kind of a way. And that's been the thing that we're committed to, is like, if you're external to an area and supporting, what is it leading from the inside out require of you? And one of the things is we have found in about 15 years of doing this in practice in the context of Sierra Leone with Fumble Talk, as you mentioned, is that it's a different kind of a system than the mainstream humanitarian system. It really sort of necessitates a top-down or an outside-in, where there's a perspective that you're bringing expertise from the outside to people who don't have it, or resources from the outside. But when you see the resources and the answers are there, and your task is to help mobilize and build, reflect, and magnify those resources. It's a different way of working, and it asks something different of you too. And then the second part of that, because it is so different from the norm, that way of operating, and when you're trying to do it not just in isolated and episodic ways, but systemic ways, basically we're building the new system as we live it out. We're building the program and the ways of working as we do it. And when you're doing something that has never been done that way before, you're moving into the unknown. And that requires a tremendous commitment and capacity to live from the inside of your highest values and to true to your highest values in an ongoing way, because you're always moving into the unknown. And so creating the space and the process and the structures where you can listen to what your highest values are and where you can allow those to lead is really critical to Inside Out. So it's both of those dimensions, structurally, systemically, creating space for the people closest to the problem to lead, and then centering the work of listening to your own deeper values. And Charles, I'm guessing you would have a different way of framing that.
Yeah, I would say for me that sort of takes root from a sense that I seem to have brought into the world, that the spiritual dimension of life is the most compelling for me. So the journey inward to try to understand who I am, why I am here, what's asked of me, what I'm given and what I'm called to offer, cultivating that in a way that is enlivening and deepening has been really central to my life's journey for as long as I can remember. The complementary part of that is, how does that interface with engagement out in the world? So I tend to think of inside and outside not as oppositional in some ways, and I'm not saying that's what Libby is saying, but as in conversation with each other always, that they're both integral parts of the system, both on a personal level, but also on an organizational level. I spent 17 years as the founding director of a global interfaith organization where we would, in organizing, would meet with people where they lived to hear their voices so that their voices would inform the collective and then bring that into the whole and the whole back out. So it's like breathing in, out, in, out. So, something that Libby has said a lot that I've, over the years of working together, come to have more words for, is that vision of a whole system that is every component of it that needs to be in healthy partnership with the most local people leading, based on the notion that, yes, the answers are there.
So it seems to me that what I'm hearing from both of you is that connection to your inside and deepest values of how you want to be in the world is what actually gives you the capacity to show up and contribute in community in the way that you do, by honoring the ideas and the answers that are already there. Is that true?
Yeah, I think so. And one of the principles I think that's at work behind that is, well, I would say, I think that's especially true when the arena that you're bringing your leadership to is something connected to social change and positive social change, right? Because social change happens as people change. And even when we're bringing our leadership to, we're people, we're not outside of a system of people. So we have to be engaging as people and be a part of the system of transformation ourselves in that way, which is, I think, the assumption behind what you're saying.
I think so. So I'm curious to hear more from each of you when you reflect on your own lives, how you initially or along the way have seen this notion of leading from the inside out show up for you.
Yeah. Well, again, I'll jump in. For me, there's the personal dimension of it. I would say where it showed up for me most obviously and sort of charted the course of my professional life was I had left, I was a college professor and I had left academia and college teaching to go into, I was really interested in the practice of peace building. And as I was a few years into that focus, I had a windfall and came into $20 million, which sounds sudden, and it was sudden, and I won't go into the circumstances behind it here, but what it did was it gave me the opportunity to shift from being on the side of somebody who was applying for grants to be able to do this work to the one who was offering and bringing the financial resources that I could activate the programs that I wanted to see. And that gave me the space to say, okay, what do I want? What do I think the world needs? How do I want to work? And it wasn't even just a what do I want to do, but how do I want to work? And I now have the opportunity and no excuse not to really to live according to my highest vision and values. And as much of an incredible gift as that is, and it is, I mean, it is an incredible privilege. It's also hugely difficult, I have found. And actually listening to and honoring your own vision and taking responsibility for living it out is a tremendously difficult process. And I have been at the edge of my own learning and capacity at every step of the now 20 years that I've been doing that. But just to give a living example of what it looks like in context, for the last 15 years, we've been working in partnership with Fumble Talk in Sierra Leone to create spaces first for the communities to heal after the war, but drawing on their own culture and their tradition. And now to lead in their ongoing development of people's-led planning and development process. And but as an example of what that means and why it's powerful and what happens when you create the space for people to lead. So one community, there's a community called Dabu in Sierra Leone that was the center, it was a rebel stronghold in Kailan district, which was the place where the war started within Sierra Leone, the 11-year civil war that decimated the country. And as a rebel stronghold, during the Civil War, half the country fled. I mean, half of the community fled. The half that stayed were either rebels or perceived to be rebel collaborators. And so when the war ended, and there was no way for them to engage in a reconciliation process, it was as if there was a weight on the community and they couldn't move forward. And I remember the first time I visited the community of Dabu, visually, the community center was destroyed. So much of the infrastructure was destroyed. There was no roads system there. There was no electricity. There was no water. The housing system, like people lived in thatched roof houses, and people had clothes that were more holes than clothes. And so it was easy and the visible and invisible effects of the war, like even the invisible effects of the war, the emotional, like, were so present, they were almost tangible, the devastation. And yet, my colleague from Sierra Leone who leads Fumble Talk, John Cocker, he would go into that community and he would see not just what the effects of the war or the problems, but he would see the resources that were there in the people and the culture. And an approach of inside out leadership, first of all, starts with that, seeing the answers and the resources that are there and bringing an orientation of, okay, well, what happens? How do we actually recognize, honor, and magnify that? So bringing the community together to identify their cultural resources, to ask how they want to reconcile, to be able to bring them together to engage in that. And they did this bonfire ceremony in the village that they themselves planned and led. Took 3 to 4 months to do it. And I'll just share one story that happened, because this is what is possible when ordinary people are given the space to lead. So when they started the bonfire, the chief who was leading it said, anybody, if there's anything happened to you or you've done during the war, come forward and testify. This is your chance to unburden yourself. And immediately a young man named Michael came forward and he said, during the war, I was forced to be a rebel, and part of the rebel, and that we came in and I was ordered to steal the food, to find food from the families that were, and everybody, of course, in Dabu fled. This one family fled, everybody escaped but their 7-year-old daughter. And Michael, during the war, captured the 7-year-old daughter, beat her, asking her to reveal where the food was. She wouldn't do it, beat her until she died. Now, he told that story, what he had done. And the facilitator said, well, is the person, the mother of the child, here? Mariama stepped forward and said, I'm the mother of the child. Michael bowed to her in forgiveness, apologized for what he had done and begged for her forgiveness, and she forgave him. In that moment, she accepted his apology. And they did it in front of the whole community, and the community embraced them, they embraced each other, and they celebrated. That was one testimony from that evening, of which throughout the evening there were several. And the next day we found out that they lived next door to each other at that point in the town and had never talked about what happened. But through this forgiveness tradition that they had in their culture, through this space of honest, hard conversation together in front of your community, through a commitment to the values of truth-telling and apology and forgiveness and restoration of the community, they were able to bring that to the surface, to forgive. And Mariama talked about how she now felt she had the support of the whole community in moving forward. Now that's one story. Their community then rebuilt their community center. They engaged in all sorts of economic development projects, and have since reknit the bonds of their community and stepped into new development. So all of that was possible. It had been possible before, but it had never been invited or activated. And an inside-out approach can see that, invite it and activate it and support it and build on it. And imagine if that is possible in that one village, what is possible when you can create a whole way of working around that?
That is so profoundly powerful. And one of the things that really stood out to me as I read your book, Libby, thank you for sharing that, story and reflection with us. And one of the things I heard you say is the values that they were living out of in those moments, the values of forgiveness and reconciliation. And I'm watching you, Charles. You're looking really thoughtful. What do you have to add here?
Well, the first thing is I know dead air is anathema in a lot of these, but that was a deep story. And I would invite just a moment of silence and invite the amazing group of people who are listening in to just bring that story into their hearts and to know that that story already resides inside them and that that story can find its expression through them in their unique ways out in the world. So just to let that powerful story settle for a moment. And then maybe a couple of things. One, I think our lives, we have all these moments that direct us a little bit, and then every now and then a moment comes up and really catches our attention, and the shift is more than just a little. I've been in my own imagination a peace builder all my life. I went to college during the turbulent years of America's war in Vietnam and the protests against that, and I was in the middle of a lot of that. But I remember going down to Washington, D.C., where we're sitting now, for a protest. And as early morning walking toward where the protest was to be in DuPont Circle, seeing a group of peace builders commandeer a great big garbage truck and push it over an embankment down onto the roadway below. And that actually shattered me to see that. People could have been killed by that. And to think that somehow that was peace building for the people who did that. I realized if that was someone else's idea of peace building, it was nothing I wanted to be a part of. Critical for me is that there's a coherence between my values and my action. And if I want my actions to be peace building, to uphold the dignity and life of other people, I need to do everything I can. And so that was a big shifting for me. I found it harder to think about protesting against and much more compelling to think about building toward. And then I'll jump 50 years or so to a month, 2 months ago, when we were together in Sierra Leone for a conference in the Kono district in Koidu town. And in one remarkable day that I believe in any way was history making, in one room, there were people from local villages running through the whole structure of society, through the Council of Paramount Chiefs, the Parliament, to the Vice President and several top cabinet members. And while some of those big people gave remarks, the heart of the meeting was when the people from the villages came and with the Vice President, the ministers, the paramount chiefs listening to them, shared their experience. And it was so clear the wisdom, the passion, the commitment that was there. They were leading from their inside out. And they, I think, inspired the whole room to rethink what these partnerships were like. And that, I think, is a capstone on the journey from that Libby and John have been on for 15 plus years in the people of Sierra Leone. It set a new marker. And I will just say, stay tuned, because there's going to be amazing things happening in the next few years.
Yeah, I can't wait to hear those stories, Charles. So thanks for your reflection on that. And what I want to pull out is we've said a number of times on this call, the word values. And I'm curious about from those who are watching and listening, and then also from you, Libby, and from you, Charles, what are the values that shape your notion of what kind of leader you want to be? So, you mentioned, Charles, that moment in Washington, D.C., where you saw the violent act and you thought, if this is what peace building is, I don't want any part of that kind of peace building. So I'd love to hear the two of you reflect on those most deeply held values that are informing the way that you want to lead and live.
Yeah. Do you want to start?
Well, I guess the one thing I'll say, one of the greatest teachers in my life was my younger brother, Eric, who was born with Down syndrome at a time when the medical profession referred to people with that syndrome as mongoloid idiots. My mother was told to put him in an institution, saying he'll never be anything but heartache for your family. So just close the door and forget about him. And she said, no, he is every bit as much God's child as my other children. And I will have him a part of the family, and we will be a family together. As he grew, my brother taught me in profound ways that there are no other people in this world. We are all humans together. And for me, the deepest value I have is that I need to do everything I'm able to access the sacred, the holy, the divine spark inside myself, so I can see it, access it, evoke it in other people. It's easy to do with some people, excruciatingly difficult with others. But for me, the challenge is everyone has that inside. And if my life is about anything, it's about trying to manifest and evoke and celebrate that.
It's beautiful.
I had to write that down. We are all humans together.
Well, I'm actually inclined to answer that in a little modified way, which is, given this fundamental conviction that the answers are there, that there's a core commitment. And when you were talking about, we're all here as people, right? Actually, to create the space where we can do this work of peace and development as people, and from an understanding that we're working with people, it actually takes a lot of work to do that, because it's really counter to the way the systems and structures and processes are set up. And so it takes a lot of work to be committed to that. In the context of Sierra Leone, which is a highly politicized country, the first value of the program is to be non-political and non-partisan. And that's critical to creating a space of trust that invites people as people. But the second thing about the way that Fumble Talk works, and it's a core commitment of Catalyst for Peace too, a values commitment, is to go to and to walk with. To go to and to walk with. So that means when I come in as an outsider, I'm not making up the program from outside. I'm going to, and I'm seeing the resources that are there, and I'm inviting that out, and I'm walking with. And what that does is it necessitates that I come in. I can bring a process expertise, but I'm bringing my commitment to be a learner. And so I have a fundamental commitment to be present in ways as a learner, because that's actually this powerful. When you come, one of the things that I found over and over again is that when you go into a community individually or institutionally, like as an institutional representative in a way where you're learning, it's actually this generative power. It's a generative force. And it's counter to what I was taught in my training in international relations, which is to cultivate my expertise as the greatest thing that I can give. And actually, it's cultivating my not knowing and my willingness to learn and to receive. And so those lead to fundamental process values of things like going to and walking with, and of creating space that's really about inviting the leadership of those that are there and creating ongoing living learning spaces. And so that might sound kind of program nerdy, but it's actually at the heart of this way of working, and it's a deeply human way, and it's what's necessary in order to work together as humans, as a capacity to create a collective decision-making, collective action space, a collective learning space for the work. So it sounds a little less glamorous in some ways, but it's the embodied form of it in this work.
And I would connect to what you said, going in as a learner, and I've shared this with Libby many times, but when I was much younger, I carried around a little day book from the organization Pax Christi that had a quote for every day. And one quote that has stayed with me for decades is attributed only to an anonymous Methodist missionary who said, "Whenever I go into a new setting, the first thing I do is to take off my shoes to remind myself I'm standing on holy ground. Otherwise, I might make the mistake of believing I bring God with me, or I bring the truth with me. I bring the answers with me." That sense that we need to have honor and reverence for what's there when we go somewhere, not feel as though we're coming in as saviors or agents of transformation.
That's really powerful. And I'm curious about if other people like me are jotting down lots of notes during this conversation. Really loving the perspective of these process values that we want to live into, and cultivating the not knowing, and the humility that you're mentioning, Charles, of recognizing that we go to holy places. We're not the ones who are bringing the answers with us. So as we think about this notion of leading from the inside out, this is something that I've come face to face with this week on my own leadership journey. And I wanted to invite your wisdom on the topic of, when you face unexpected challenges or setbacks, when things are not really going the way you thought they might go, how can you ensure and stay connected to your values so that you continue to live from the inside out?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's, first of all, it's a beautiful question. And I would say holding the intention to do that is actually, 3/4 of the way, frankly. So in some ways, I think it's one of those questions that if you just ask it and live in the question itself, it really supports you moving in that direction. For me, and I think there's a lot of ways to answer it. One thing that I would say is I have found, first of all, those are not things that we can do individually. We need community. We need community. And the stronger our community is, the easier it is to do that. I think this idea of living out our values in the world, in our work in the world, as Charles was talking about in his opening, we can do that so much more powerful. Like, it's hugely magnifying power to do that in community and in collective. And as we build communities of support and of leadership that help us to name and claim our program values, our process values, and then where we come together and to reflect on them, where we bring challenges to the community. I'll just share one story because it really powerfully illustrates that. Early in the Fumble Talk days, when we first started, and it was a completely new way of working in Sierra Leone, right? And it was dependent on mobilizing volunteers at the community level to help run the programming. And they had started rolling out the program in several communities in Sierra Leone. And John found out that one of the gentlemen, when he was going into communities, was abusing the community's trust and desire for this reconciliation. There was such a thirst for it that he was saying, okay, now you have to pay to participate. So he was, from these communities that had little to no, like, negative resources, he was extracting money from them and pocketing it himself, completely undermining the credibility of the Fumble Talk program. And anyway, John found out about it. He called me to tell me about it. I remember I was crestfallen. I was like, oh my gosh, how do you handle that? In these early stages, it could completely undermine the credibility of the whole program. And so, of course, I wanted an answer. I wanted an answer. And I asked John. He was quiet for a minute. And then he sat back and he said, he didn't give me an answer. He said, I don't know, but together we will figure it out. Together we will figure a way out. And that became emblematic to me of the power of community, that actually I don't need to have an answer to your question for you. In fact, you probably don't even need to do it. I know, Becky, you have an incredible team because I've worked with your incredible team. together we will figure it out. And so it's creating those spaces for that together. It's giving up our need to know and to always have the answers. And it's trusting in that larger force that is holding us all. And that's the other thing that I think we do. Core to our work, besides the answers are there, is this fundamental faith conviction that we're actually in the service of a power much greater than us. And the very ideas that we're committing our life to are much larger than us. And they have this power and agency on their own. They're in operation. And we can create processes where we come together that help us to feel that, to touch into that, to tap into that, and to actually put ourselves in a space where we can receive the answers that come through that combination of strong community and clarity around and tapping into those larger values. So I could probably go on for longer, but
that's powerful. Well, can you speak to the idea of the wisdom circle? So I know in the book, Libby, you talk about how you have lived into community and surrounded yourself with those who can support the work that you've been doing, even as you're supporting them. And I know our listeners would love to hear about that.
Yeah, absolutely. So this was about 7 or 8 years into Fumble Talk's work. And I had been running Catalyst for Peace for several years before I started Fumble Talk, and felt like Fumble Talk had represented this full expression of my values. Between the program, and we produced a documentary film and a book, and lots of other sort of communications processes around it. But I found myself, it was as if I had been a pitcher of water, and I had poured and poured and poured all of my heart, my soul, my resources, my energy into it, and had poured myself out. I was exhausted. We had come to a fork in the road in the work. I didn't know how to go forward. I had lost myself, and I had lost Catalyst for Peace organizationally in supporting the work in Sierra Leone and supporting Fumble Talk. And it was like I hit a wall. I couldn't go forward anymore. And although I had a series of individual relationships with advisors and supporters in different ways, I felt like I needed something more. And I called together a group of these trusted, wise folks, including Charles, including John, including others. And we came together. And one of the things that we had done we had asked everybody, both that was there and those that I had worked with, that we had worked with in the past, to reflect on some of the uniquenesses that they saw in me as a leader and in Catalyst for Peace as an organization. And we started that gathering with people reflecting those things back to me. And at that time, I had been so focused on creating space for others' leadership, I completely lost sight of myself. And hearing reflected back to me all of my strengths, it was almost physically painful, Becky. It was more than I could handle. And I felt so uncomfortable being in the middle of a space in that way, which of course it incapacitates you as a leader if you can't actually see and honor your own strengths, that inside out for yourself. You're losing your capacity to offer your gifts to the world ultimately, right? So part of the gift of that space, of that wisdom circle space, was bringing in people and creating a space where I could have people mirror back my strengths and successes and accompanying me in a collective discernment process around what was next for me as a person, as a leader, and for CFP as an organization. It was transformational at many levels. And for me, the fundamental lesson was I had to learn how to receive more. And I learned a critical principle. And I am somebody who's oriented towards giving, and I am was in a role where I was giving financial resources as part of the gift that I was offering. But I learned a fundamental principle that I can only give to the degree that I'm actually willing and able to receive. Like there's actually a proportionality there that I think. And it was much harder for me to learn how to receive than it was for me to learn how to give. And I think that's a dynamic. Actually, I think it's one of the things that makes leadership, social change leadership, powerful, is cultivating our capacity to learn and to be transformed. It's like I opened the book with this epigraph, this quote from Rumi, Yesterday I was clever, so I wanted to change the world. Today I am wise, so I am changing myself.
Mm.
And for me, I have found I have needed a community of support in order to do that. And it's counterintuitive in so many ways. And maybe it's not for others, but for me, it was that to strengthen my leadership, I needed to bring in others and a process and a community that could support me. And it's opened up. So, and we kept that going in an ongoing way. And it became a circle of support for me. And then a process that we actually integrated into the organization in an ongoing way, to have a wisdom circle that supported me. And it also supported this connection to the larger universal wisdom, which is an opening to a much greater resource, I think, available to us all.
That is super powerful. Charles, did you have anything you wanted to reflect on with that?
Sure. And to me, I would just say that what Libby was just sharing about the wisdom circle was also related to the previous question you asked about challenges. How do you deal with that?
Yeah.
And I just had a series of little points that came up to me. One is that it's important to keep the long view in the big picture. It's really easy to get caught in the urgency of the moment and forget to step back and see a broader sweep of time, and to know that what you're experiencing right now is one point that you're moving through. And so don't get stuck there. Another is to admit you need help and ask for it.
And be willing and able to receive it.
There you go. Another is to disabuse yourself and your colleagues of any notion of perfection. Just take it off the table. We aren't going to do this perfectly. It's not going to happen. So let's do the best we can and keep moving. Another is to just in every moment experience and express gratitude. I've sat in many hard meetings with little prayer beads, and with every bead simply said, thank you, thank you, thank you.
Show your.
Oh, like these.
Mm.
And that can completely shift my perspective and energy on the difficulties I'm experiencing. Thank you. Okay, there's a gift here. We're trying to unwrap it. It may take us 10 minutes or 10 weeks, or God save us, 10 months, but we are unwrapping that. And the last piece is to be open to and expect being surprised that the answer, it will likely look different from what you're imagining you need from a place of challenge, crisis, great demand, that create the space for the unexpected to come in, and you realize, oh, wow, it's right here, right now.
And I'd love to just build on that with a specific practice that we've adopted organizationally, because I think people might find it helpful. You know, in our work in Sierra Leone, nothing ever goes the way that it's planned. It just doesn't. And I'm sure that that's true for a lot of people in a lot of places. But before a major event, including before this October event that Charles referred to earlier, which went differently in every way than we thought it would. One of our practices is for the team that's planning, as we get close to the event, or, you know, we imagine and say, okay, let's imagine we're on the other side of this event. Or this morning we just did it because we're looking at the year ahead. We did it for the whole year. Imagine we're in 2024 meeting again like this, and we're looking back on this year, and it's been the most incredible year that we can ever imagine. What has happened? And we write, what would success look like? And not just, you know, partial success or uncomfortable success, but thriving success. And we write that down, and we have everybody on our team think about that, reflect on that, share that, and then we build a collective success. You know, in October, success for the October event would be. And what was astonishing, and what is astonishing, we found after the event in October, nothing had happened the way we thought that it would. But when we went back to our measures of success, our visions for success, everything that was on our list had happened. And so it's a practice that gives you a concreteness to your vision. It pulls out the things that are inside of you that you know already, but might not have said or shared. And it gives you a collective field to sort of inhabit, I think, through the way you're engaging in that work. And we found that it's just a concrete practice that is really generative and been transformative for us.
I love that. And I wrote that down too, because I now have many pages of notes of whenever you're in that difficult moment, thinking about a year from now and what success might look like then. That's definitely a keeper. So I want to get to some of the questions that have been coming in the chat, some really specific questions from people who are working in change making. And I have one from Jane. Let's see if we can answer that for her. She said she's interested in your views about current work with Ukraine and surrounding countries. So work with Ukrainians who may be in surrounding countries who are in the middle of conflict, huge and ongoing losses, and many in exile. They have enormous skills and resources, but are in very painful and challenging situations. What thoughts do you have?
You want to go for that?
Go right ahead.
I mean, I don't have any specific thoughts about that. Actually, we're not working in Ukraine. And the part of me that is in this field professionally is like, because I'm not working there, I don't want to respond to it. What I would say is that I think there are way too many refugees in our world right now, fleeing from violence and other things. And in terms of potential, I think our refugee populations have so much untapped potential. And I think it's incumbent upon us as a world, we will all be better off to the degree that we can actually see refugees, not just in terms of the immediate needs they have, but the potential that they have, and think of our responses in terms of how do we create spaces for that potential to go forward and grow, which isn't to say you're not addressing also the immediate needs. But so it's just a way of framing it, I guess, more than a concrete response.
Well, and what I would add to that, I spent some years leading a small organization that worked in an immigrant refugee community that was geographically isolated from the larger context. And rather than feeling the larger context had gifts to give the immigrant refugee community who were only needy, we tried to create a two-way bridge that said these people have life experience that may be unimaginable to the folks in the larger community. They have a lot to offer. So how do we create ways to come together that are based on mutuality? Yes, there's a desperation in the plight of refugees, and there is so much potential and promise. One of our colleagues here was talking yesterday about how challenging his early years as a refugee were. And now he's an international peace builder of remarkable capacity. That journey exists in the potential in everyone. How do we see each other in ways that can help create the conditions for that in the midst of admittedly heartbreaking, enormously challenging, overwhelming circumstances? I'm not trying to say it's easy, but if that's the mindset, there can be openings you would never see otherwise.
Yeah.
Thank you for that. And Jane, I hope that was helpful to you. I do also have a question from Chris, and Chris is part of a peace building organization and is mentioning that in Africa, they're facing numerous challenges in accessing funding, and wondering if you have any guidance about seeking funding.
Yeah, well, it's not an easy thing. And I think this is not really a direct answer to Chris, other than maybe it's a commiserating. I think the funding system needs to change. And one of the huge problems is, and I think there are a lot of initiatives that are really working to change that system. So that's more the level at which we're operating, is how do we change that system? And Deegan Ali and her organization, for example, is working at this, doing some great work out I want to say Aweso, but I'm not sure that that's the name of it, but Deegan Ali, and others like Peace Direct that are doing really good work about how do we work to change systems so that they can support the local peace builders. So I would just commiserate with both the need and the fact that there is some good work happening, and that's a conversation that we're really interested in and helping to serve and support.
Thank you, Libby. And somebody grabbed the name of that person and their organization and put it in the chat. So thanks to you, Julia. Julia. Yeah, thanks, Julia. Way to go on that. Let's see. I've got a really big comment here that I'm trying to assimilate. I can't tell if it's a question or a comment. I'll do my best to get to it. So I want to circle back to one of the questions that we'd planned to talk about while we wait to see if there are any other questions from our attendees. If we want to be leaders who are leading from the inside out, leaders who are inviting answers from the communities that we're, hoping to support, and allowing those inside leaders to be the ones who are emerging with the answers. What kind of resistance, if we are people who want to live on the edge of learning, what's some resistance or challenge that we might expect to face?
I think there's a lot of both internal and external challenge. And like the question about suggestion for funding for African, for good peace work in Africa, like that's one of the external challenges. The fact that funders make us jump through hoops that are actually taking us away from the work that we're doing, as opposed to actually serving, supporting, and strengthening our work. Or there's always a constant asking for measurable, externally visible things. One of the structural problems, I think, is that the funding processes are structured to recognize product over process. And actually, real change in community happens by emphasizing process, not product. And so we've come to an understanding of process as product. So for example, but when you have a funding structure that wants to see the building that you've built, as opposed to the people that you've brought together and the relationships that you've been in a community container that you've, helped to heal, those aren't externally visible, but they impact everything. Those are some of the external challenges. For me, from my perspective, the internal challenges are oftentimes the harder ones. And coming from my perspective, I'll just share from my perspective, like some of the things that have been really hard for me in this specific work. I mentioned one earlier. I am continually challenged to let go of my understandings of expertise and pressure to bring the answers with me that lead me to hold a lot of pressure on my shoulders completely in a way that ignores the other resources that are there, or inhibits my ability to participate freely. Like that's one thing. And another thing is my desire sometimes, the inner planner in me wants to know how things are going to happen and how to go forward. And exactly. And I've had to let go and cultivate my trust and faith in the process and understand what are good processes to put in place to actually support the right unfoldment and cultivate a flexibility and an adaptability individually and organizationally. One of the things that we practice is what we call emergent design. So it means you have a core vision of where you want to go and some key principles, but then you're adapting based on emerging realities on the ground. And you have the capacity to adapt the program itself, which in our field, a lot of funders would not allow you to do. So how do we put in place the processes and structures that support that kind of ability to be flexible and adaptive? We need to understand what it takes organizationally and programmatically in order to do that too. And that's kind of, again, a program nerdy kind of answer to it. But for me, individually, what that's required is two things. One is a willingness to be flexible and adaptive. And to create the learning spaces as you go that support your capacity to do that. So you need to, and that's connected to the other, which is slowing down. In order to have spaces where you can adapt your design, you have to slow down. You have to have time where you stop the doing and reflect. And it's one of the things I write about in the book. John and I, my colleague, John Cocker, we had so much reflective time inadvertently because we spent a lot of time driving in the car because the roads in Sierra Leone were so bad and we were working in rural communities that took hours and hours to get to. And so we'd have all this unstructured time that at first I was like, this isn't being productive. But then it's what allowed us to have this unstructured, big, luxurious, gracious space of thinking and reflecting together and conversation. And it was that time of not doing that actually is what shaped and strengthened our muscles to be able to really have things unfold in much more powerful ways over the long term. So we talk about sometimes you have to go slow to go fast. Mm-hmm. So that's a little bit of an answer.
Yeah, I would just say that it is to cultivate a healthy, balanced tension between humility and boldness. We have to believe in ourselves. We have to believe strongly enough to be willing to go forward in the face of sometimes really heavy winds. And we have to be humble enough to be willing to learn. And the other piece is that I speak for myself, but from lots of other people I know, there are all kinds of little gremlins that inhabit us, that at the worst possible moments, they'll say, oh, you're not doing that very well, or you're not enough this, or, oh, that would be a mistake, or, oh, we need to develop strategies, first of all, to recognize them. Because if you don't recognize them, they really control you. They are at the wheel, they're in the driver's seat. But if you come to, oh, there's that voice, then how do you disarm its negative power? And to me, that is seeing it, naming it, thanking it for the gift it's trying to give me, and asking it to please go away.
Just to build on that for me, because I think those voices that you were imitating were probably things that you've heard from me saying to you quite often. I think we need each other to do this. We need each other to do this. We need individual people that we can offload these things with and to, and we need community. We need community. And for several reasons, I think, because for the reasons I've talked about before, like with the wisdom circle, but also those internal gremlins I have found, sometimes they are actually individual, but more often they're symptoms of a culture that is valuing something that is actually different from what I value. And so it's a culturally received belief. And if I think of it as mine, then I make it a lot more work to get it off my back. But if I can understand it as culture, and if I can actually inhabit a different culture that is kinder and more generous and generative and gracious and graceful, which we need community to do. That we need being human together in order to have more permission and capacity to be human.
Thank you so much for that. We are coming very close to the end of our hour, and I want to make sure that we have a chance to let you know how to continue to learn from Libby and from Charles as he's part of her world. So here's some possibilities for you next. You know, if you don't already have a copy of The Answers Are There, I would encourage you to buy the book today. Reading the book really is like, you know, spending however long you're in the book with Libby herself. So much of Libby shows up in this book, her wisdom, her stories. It's so powerful. So I would encourage you to buy the book today. It's available at all your favorite online retailers. You know, maybe there are some change makers in your world who would appreciate this book as a gift, as something that they can spend some time learning with in the year ahead. If you have already read the book, we would love to ask you to leave a review on Amazon. Your Amazon review helps other readers to find the book and know the value that it will bring to them. If you're part of an organization, you may want to consider whether you could make a bulk purchase to gift the book to several in your organization to read together as part of a book club. And I know if you do that, Libby would want to hear about it and may have a way to help you with that. We also can, there will be a link in the chat where there's a sample to the book on Libby's website, so you could share that with your colleagues. You can sign up to hear from Libby in her newsletter in an ongoing way, or you could consider inviting Libby to be a part of your upcoming event. So we would invite you to continue to explore. And I'm just going to say, I'd love to have you follow Catalyst for Peace on all the social media channels, because in an ongoing way, we're showing up to offer value to Libby's online communities. So those are just a few ways that you can engage with this content moving forward. Libby and Charles, I see it's already 1 o'clock. I can't believe our hour together is over. Thank you so much for sharing your heart and your expertise. And folks, thank you for joining us today.
Thank you, Becky. It's
Yeah.
been such a privilege and pleasure.
Let's see.